Just hours away, Canada still has not secured a deal. That means Canada could face a 35% blanket tariff from the U.S. starting tomorrow on products not covered by our free trade deal. Prime Minister Mark Carney said yesterday that negotiations not yet over. Asked about Canada today, the U.S. president criticized Carney's decision to recognize a Palestinian state this fall, but he said it won't stand in the way of a deal.
I didn't like what they said, but, that's their opinion. I didn't like that. Not a deal breaker, but we haven't spoken to Canada today. He's called, and we'll see.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says it's hard to tell what to expect from Trump tomorrow.
Well, Prime Minister Carney is trying his best, but this guy will say something one day, and he'll wake up, and the cheese slips off the cracker, and then all of a sudden he goes the other way. And you're thinking, how do you deal with a guy like this? Are we hoping that we can get a deal with zero tariffs? Yes. But I always say how we can kick back, and it's not the American people kick back at President Trump. Let's start onshoring everything.
And now wish I brought cheese and crackers for the power panel that joins me now. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister, and here with me in studio, James Moore, former Conservative cabinet minister, and Carleen Varian is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. Good day to all of you.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi, David.
Do you know, this has nothing to do with the topic at hand, but to date Andrew and I, and make us both sound old, when I was a very junior reporter and he was a very junior finance minister, we would sit on opposite sides of a microphone.
We were so much younger then. I don't know what's happened to me. You still look fine.
It's up close. It's very different, Andrew. Anyway, to the task at hand. James, you hear Premier Ford there talking about his concerns getting the deal done. Can I just ask briefly about the cheese and cracker analogy? I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, I suppose not uncommon, but look, Premier Ford actually plays a helpful role in terms of clearing the room a little bit and saying some things out loud with authority that would be inappropriate for the Prime Minister or our ambassador or anybody who sits around the cabinet table to say. He also reflects a lot of public sentiment about the state of the President of the United States and the way he approaches his bilateral relations with Canada or his multilateral relations with the rest of the world. So he's kind of a useful aspect of the dynamic in Canada in terms of being a release valve for what a lot of people are thinking.
Hey, Carleen, I do want to ask you about what the best case scenario is here as the clock ticks down. Admittedly, it's not as if this is going to happen automatically. The paperwork has to happen. There has to be an executive order. Somebody has to tell the people at the border what to charge. So it's not going to be an immediate thing. Having said all of that, what is the best case scenario?
Well, first of all, when you say as the clock ticks down, I think the question Canadians are increasingly asking themselves is there a clock? Where is it? What time zone is it in? Is it working properly? Are there batteries in it? The timelines constantly shift. The best case scenario for Canada continues to be, for now, to kick the can down the road as far as they possibly can. And the reason for that, mostly, David, is that the Americans have so far demonstrated a bit of a deference and a respect for CUSMA compliance as far as tariffs go. And right now, roughly about 80% of goods that are crossing the border do meet that compliance level, which means that they are duty-free. Now, that doesn't protect and preserve entirely our steel and aluminum sectors, but so long as that deal continues to be in place until next year, it does give us a bit of protection that other countries don't have. So that's why you hear Mark Carney constantly saying no deal is better than a bad deal for now.
Andrew, I want to ask you about what Mexico got. They didn't get a deal, but they got an extension, 90 days. It pushes them up to when CUSMA renegotiations sort of could, the very early stages of that, when that's set to happen. The fact that they got an extension, that we didn't, that they went just for negotiation, but we also did retaliation. What does it say about the differences in our approach and what they netted?
Well, I think we also have to understand that there's big differences about what's on the table. The situation with Canada is much more complicated because of the integration of the economy, the ability for us to retaliate that Mexico doesn't have. I mean, these are much more complex discussions that are going to be going on. Mexico has a much weaker hand than Canada does, and that's, I think, reflected in terms of how they are managing their negotiations, and frankly, it seems they're managing them well from a Mexican perspective. But to suggest that we would move in lockstep with them, I don't think is in Canada's interest. In a lot of ways, the trade situation that we have in the country, as has been pointed out, is largely still covered and protected under CUSMA. The retaliatory tariffs or the aggressive tariffs that the Americans wanted to put on are on. It's unclear really what else gets gained out of this by moving the Canadian negotiations with the U.S. from the U.S. standpoint forward more aggressively rather than trying to settle with some of the other countries first.
I do want to ask about the Palestinian statehood recognition, but I want to ask about it in the context of the negotiations going on now. And I ask because the president saw the statehood recognition, said by social media posts, essentially that this complicates things. What do you make of the timing? And I want us to go specifically on the timing. Canada's decision 2 days before Trump's deadline to do something that was likely to irk him.
Odd and not helpful. There's a saying in politics that in order to be successful in politics and successful in governing, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing for Canada has been August 1st, has been the Canada-U.S. relationship, has been trade. There's no reason why the Prime Minister had to make this decision now and the Government of Canada had to convene a special meeting. I get that the UN General Assembly is coming up, but so what? Let the UN General Assembly come up, let there be a vote, let Canada either abstain or vote no for our own reasons, and recognize that even though the UK and the EU and France have their positions on this that are counter to what the President of the United States thinks about these things, and they managed to have their own trade deal, as Carleen pointed out, this is a president who is all over the road, and his approach to things, as they say, is a science of single instances, which is a science of no science at all. He's all over the road. There's no reason to think that he would treat Canada the same way that he treats Europe or others. So the idea that we would go out of our way to possibly irk the United States at a time like this is not helpful. Now, the idea of recognizing a Palestinian state is something that's been true for Canada for generations, frankly, since the establishment of the State of Israel. That's been true for conservative governments, liberal governments. It's always been the case. And if you look at the way that the Prime Minister talks about this and about the caveats that he'd like to see in place, and the clip that you showed of Pierre Poilievre and the interview you just did with Michael Chong, the positions are actually not that far apart. But it's clear that the Prime Minister wanted the headline to be that Canada is recognizing a Palestinian state, which is an odd thing to do when the Palestinian state, as it is today, currently with the Hamas government, a terror state, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis, an act of genocide, and we're going to recognize the Palestinians with that quote government in place right now with the atrocities that they committed is not something that I think is appropriate at this time.
Although the Prime Minister and Carleen, you can do a better job than I ought to do at trying to defend this government's actions, but the Prime Minister did say that Hamas should play no role in any future government.
Sure. So how about recognize a Palestinian government and state at the time when Hamas is no longer being prosecuted for an act of genocide against Israelis who are at a music festival?
Carleen.
If I had to guess what the Prime Minister and his team were thinking about when they made this choice on timing, I would guess that there were two things at play. One was certainly the growing international chorus and the fact that there was a desire to move somewhat in tandem with like-minded allied countries like the UK, like France. The other thing I suspect they were probably keeping in mind is that this isn't exactly a winner of an issue for. I think that there's any political party, mainstream political party in Canada that actively wants to be talking about the horrific conflict in the Middle East as a political winner. The timing of doing this and knowing that there would be a great big news story happening one way or the other 2 days later with this trade deadline effectively ensured that they would get a somewhat limited news cycle out of it, more than if it was just dropped in the dead of summer with nothing else to talk about. So those are some fairly I don't want to say cynical, but there's some very practical considerations.
Although
there,
you could have waited till September when there is a lot more news. To James's point, you could have waited till then, and there'd be more things going on in the news.
You could, but I think some of the international alignment that was happening was probably timely for this particular week.
Well, caucus pressure, let's be clear. The caucus clearly wanted this, and they wanted this done a long time ago. I think they wanted more overt signs and signals of solidarity with the suffering of the Palestinian people, which is fine, but in my view, this is not the way to do it, to recognize a Hamas government, or to be seen to be. I know there's a slight variation in language here.
I hear you. You're talking about what are the optics here of what's happening. All right, Andrew, you probably want to get in on this.
I do not.
Yeah, minefields everywhere.
Yes.
Look, let me ask you. I'll be specific on the timing of it and just get your thoughts around the decision. You've heard the conversation and some of the potential rationale. What do you make of the timing of it?
I mean, I think Carleen's right, and certainly there is this. movement for a group of the Western democracies to try to move forward on this issue in unison, with or without the United States. As part of that, that seems to be the approach that's being taken. That seems to have been decided some months ago. Not on this specific issue, but that we would move in tandem with a number of other Western European democracies. I thought Michael Chong's interview was very interesting today. And certainly the most important thing that I think that he brought forward to it is, again, Canada's very much a bit player in this. We have almost no assets in the Middle East. We have almost no ability to project power or influence in the region. And so this does come back to whether we're supporting kind of that European vision of how to move forward, and in the process signal that we are maybe one step further removed from the U.S. than we would normally be. Which isn't unusual. We were this way on Iraq. We didn't follow the U.S. in complete unison and lockstep. Or are we taking a slightly more independent approach? And I think that that's what's being signaled here. But it is a difficult domestic issue, and I think one that certainly the Prime Minister has felt he needs to address.
I want to pick up on what Andrew's saying, and I want to ask you two in particular, because you've been in front of the camera, James Moore, not always on a portfolio that would see this issue. But
some would say I am right now. But yeah.
Some would say, what's going on here, right? Yeah. What is it like being in politics and trying to navigate this issue with the interested, engaged parties who have family members in the region here, trying to navigate it, particularly when you are the party in power?
Yeah, it's a big question. I would take it this way. Look at the field as broadly as you can. Try to see as far down as many corners as you possibly can. Draw in as many smart people who will tell you what you've thought of and what you've not thought of, so you can sort of flip over those stones and anticipate the unanticipatable, and be as measured and responsible as you can. As they say, measure twice, cut once. Like, be very thoughtful and deliberate. To the point, I think that was just raised, that Michael Chong pointed out, right, that Canada is not a large player in this space. But domestically, there's huge political traction on this. And frankly, when the NDP leadership race gets kicking up into full steam, I think it'll be a very big issue that will probably rear its head in Parliament, I think, in probably some really ugly ways. So I think what's happening over there, and the tragedy that a lot of people are seeing, whether it's the Gazans or the fear that Israelis fear about sort of constant attacks for years to come, I think those tensions and anxieties that people have for family members over there will find their way into the House of Commons, I think, in pretty dark ways, so that people can exploit them for votes. And I think as a government, you have a responsibility to try to rise above that, to see through it, and to make sure that you're doing what's in the best interest, more broadly, of Canada's foreign policy.
Say a message that isn't going to greatly anger one side or another, or be heard in a very specific way, when things are so tense?
It's nearly impossible, and that is why you so often see leaders of governments and political leaders speak in such platitudes when it comes to these topics. This is, in particular, an issue where the Liberal Party is in a really challenging position, because I would venture to say that among the three major federal parties, it is the party that straddles the broadest coalition of individuals who would count among themselves either strong supporters of Israel or very strong supporters of a free and independent Palestinian state, and everybody in between. It is a caucus that is enormously difficult to manage and keep happy on this issue. And so Prime Minister Carney, not just as a new Prime Minister, but as a new leader of a caucus, somebody who's new to those dynamics, I suspect is finding that to be an interesting challenge. One thing in an issue like this that you always have to keep in mind when you're speaking to a nation is that there's nothing that you can say that's going to please everybody. So you have to do the best to find the balance between your own convictions and what decision it is that you've actually had to take that you have to own.
Not the last we'll be talking about this.